The alarm system screamed through every corridor of the freighter distant shore, but Olivia Reed had already heard the worst sound: silence from her alien crewmates. 3 months into what should have been a routine cargo run, and now Talvik and Brielle had gone completely quiet over the communication channels. No responses, no acknowledgements, just the kind of silence that meant something had gone terribly wrong. Olivia moved through the narrow passages toward the cargo hold, her boots magnetic against the metal floor. Behind her, Danny Wright checked his handheld scanner while Ashok Patel kept one hand near the emergency medical kit. The 3 humans exchanged glances but said nothing. Whatever had spooked their Ranthian engineer and Kiros navigator badly enough to make them seal themselves in their quarters without explanation deserved caution. The cargo bay doors hung open. One panel bent slightly inward. Olivia saw the breach immediately. A micrometeorite had punched through the hull plating and pierced one of the sealed containers they were transporting for the Collective Science Ministry. Silvery fluid leaked across the floor, pooling in the low gravity. The container itself had cracked open like an egg and something inside was moving. Danny raised his scanner, but the readings made no sense. High thermal output, unusual electromagnetic signatures, and something else the device kept labeling as unknown energy pattern. Ashok moved to check the environmental systems, making sure the atmosphere remained stable. Olivia approached the damaged container slowly, keeping her movements smooth and predictable. Years of working with skittish animals back on Earth had taught her that sudden motions only made bad situations worse. The creature that emerged from the container defied easy description. It stood nearly 2 meters tall at the shoulder, built like something between a great cat and a wolf but scaled up to impossible proportions. Midnight black fur covered its body, so dark it seemed to absorb the cargo bay lights. 6 eyes arranged in a crown around its head fixed on Olivia with an intelligence that made her breath catch. A mane of tendril-like appendages flowed from its neck and shoulders, moving independent of any breeze in the recycled air. Olivia felt pressure against her thoughts, like someone pressing gently against a door in her mind. The sensation was strange but not painful, curious rather than aggressive. The creature made a sound like wind moving through deep caves, mournful and questioning at the same time. It took 1 step forward, then another, moving with liquid grace despite its size. Danny and Ashok tensed but held their positions. Olivia found herself speaking without planning the words. Her voice came out soft and steady. She told the creature they meant no harm. She explained about the breach, about the accident, about how they were just trying to understand what happened. Whether it understood her words or just her tone, something in the creature relaxed. The tendril mane stopped its agitated movement. The 6 eyes blinked in sequence like ripples across water. The creature settled onto the cargo bay floor, lowering its massive body until it rested on its belly. It continued watching the humans with apparent curiosity. Olivia tried the communication panel, cycling through channels until she reached the Science Ministry emergency line. The response came faster than expected, and the scientist who appeared on the screen looked both excited and terrified. "Captain Reed, I need you to confirm what you're seeing. Describe the specimen, please." Olivia provided the details while keeping half her attention on the creature, which had begun examining a loose cargo strap with 1 tendril. The scientist went pale. "You're in the same room with it? You're not experiencing any distress? Should I be?" A long pause followed. The scientist consulted something off-screen, then looked back at Olivia with an expression mixing awe and fear. "Captain, you've just made peaceful contact with a species we call dreadveils. They're psychic apex predators. Every sentient species in the collective experiences overwhelming existential terror in their presence. Every species except yours. In 2,000 years of recorded history, no one has ever been in the same space as an active dreadveil without suffering complete psychological breakdown." Olivia looked at the creature, which had abandoned the cargo strap and was now watching the conversation, with what she could only interpret as interest. "It seems calm, non-aggressive. That's because you're human. Your species doesn't trigger their predatory response, and they don't trigger your fear response the way they do with other species. Captain Reed, dreadveils have been classified as existential threats since first contact. 7 civilizations went extinct after encounters with them. 40,000 beings died on Station Karthus when one escaped containment, though most died from fear-induced panic rather than direct attack." Danny muttered something under his breath. Ashok had pulled up files on his tablet, scanning through historical records with growing concern. Olivia kept her eyes on the dread veil, which had risen to its feet again and was approaching her position. She held perfectly still. The creature stopped an arm's length away. Up close, she could see details the distance had hidden: scars beneath the dark fur, places where the coat grew thin or patchy, signs of old injuries. This was not some pristine specimen, but a being that had suffered. One tendril extended toward her, moving slowly. It stopped just short of touching her shoulder, waiting. Olivia recognized the gesture from her work with rescue animals. Asking permission. Requesting trust, she extended her hand. The tendril brushed against her palm, soft and warm despite appearing smooth as polished stone. The pressure in her mind increased slightly, then faded. The dread veil made that wind-through canyon sound again, but softer this time, almost gentle. The scientist was still talking, explaining protocols and procedures and emergency containment measures. Olivia barely heard it. She was watching this creature that the entire galaxy feared, this being that had been locked in a box and shipped like cargo, and seeing something else entirely. She saw intelligence. She saw curiosity. She saw something that might have been loneliness. What do we do? Danny asked quietly. Olivia made her decision. We talk to it. We figure out what it needs. And we prove that fear isn't the only possible response. The dread veil tilted its head, all 6 eyes focusing on her with an intensity that should have been frightening but somehow wasn't. In that moment, Olivia understood they were standing at the edge of something unprecedented. Humanity's unique immunity to the dread veil's psychic effect wasn't just a biological curiosity. It was an opportunity, a chance to bridge a gap that had existed for millennia. The creature settled back onto its haunches, still watching her, waiting to see what happened next. Olivia took a breath and prepared to find out if understanding could overcome instinct, if compassion could reach across a divide made of fear, and if the monster the galaxy had created might actually be something else entirely. Emergency protocols had turned the distant shore into a ship divided. In the forward sections, Talvik and Briel remained locked behind sealed doors, their vital signs showing elevated stress levels that refused to normalize. In the cargo bay, Olivia watched what Danny had nicknamed Whisper arrange pieces of broken container in careful patterns across the floor. The dread veil worked with surprising delicacy, using its tendril mane to position each fragment just so, creating designs that suggested intelligence and purpose. A shock set up monitoring equipment at a safe distance, documenting everything: heart rate, body temperature, electromagnetic emissions, and that strange energy signature the scanners still couldn't properly identify. Whisper tolerated the sensors with what appeared to be patient curiosity, occasionally glancing at the devices before returning to its careful construction work. 3 days to the nearest collective station. 3 days to figure out if peaceful coexistence was possible, or if humanity had just made the worst diplomatic mistake in galactic history. Olivia reviewed the classified files the Science Ministry had transmitted, and each page made the situation seem more impossible. The historical records painted dread veils as unstoppable, catastrophes wrapped in fur and psychic power first. Contact had happened 2,000 years ago when a collective exploration vessel discovered a dread veil den on an uncharted world. The crew experienced immediate psychological breakdown. 3 members died from fear-induced heart failure before the ship could retreat. When a military force returned to study the phenomena, the dread veils defended their territory. The resulting conflict escalated until the collective made the decision to sterilize the entire region from orbit. 7 colonies established near dread veil territories went extinct over the following century, their populations either dying from sustained exposure to dread veil presence or fleeing and abandoning everything they'd built. Danny leaned against a support beam, watching Whisper with an expression somewhere between fascination and concern. The files say they're apex predators, so why isn't it hunting us? Olivia had been wondering the same thing. Maybe because we're not acting like prey. Ashok looked up from his tablet. I've been going through xenobiology databases. Every species that encounters dread veils experiences them as the embodiment of existential dread. A Ranthian sees its evolutionary dead end. A Kairos perceives the extinction of its hive. A Vryn witnesses the heat death of the universe made manifest. The dread veil's psychic ability doesn't create fear. It amplifies and reflects the deepest terror already present in the observer's mind. But humans don't experience that? Danny asked. Apparently not. We evolved alongside apex predators. We learned to recognize them, understand them, even domesticate some of them. Our fear response is strong but contextual. We can evaluate and overcome it in ways other species can't. Ashok gestured toward Whisper. To other species, a dread veil is the end of everything. To us, it's just another predator. Dangerous, yes. Worthy of respect, absolutely. But understandable. Whisper had finished its pattern work and was now watching the humans again. Olivia noticed it tracked conversations, head tilting when someone spoke, eyes focusing on the speaker. She made a decision and approached slowly. Stopping several meters away, she pointed to herself. Olivia. The dread veil watched her. She pointed again, repeating her name. Then she gestured toward the creature and made an inquiring sound. Whisper stood, moving with that liquid grace that made something so large seem weightless. It came closer, and Olivia fought the instinct to step back. The creature extended one tendril, touched its own chest, and made a sound like distant thunder filtered through crystal. Danny laughed with surprise. It understands. It knows you're trying to communicate. Over the next several hours, they worked on building a basic framework. Ashok programmed a simple interface using lights and symbols. Yes and no. Safe and danger. Food and water. Basic needs and concepts. Whisper learned with stunning speed, responding to queries with deliberate choices. When asked if it was hungry, the dread veil indicated yes. When offered standard ration bars, it investigated them carefully before eating, proving it could process human food even if the taste was questionable. The breakthrough came when Ashok displayed a symbol sequence asking if Whisper understood what the humans were trying to do. The dread veil studied the screen for a long moment, then used its tendrils to interact with the touch interface. It selected symbols in careful order. Understand, communicate, friend. Olivia felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't just an animal responding to training. This was a sentient being reaching across a barrier that had existed for millennia, trying to connect despite everything. A priority transmission interrupted the moment. Admiral Kess appeared on the main screen, and even through the distance and digital interface, Olivia could see the strain on the Vryn commander's scaled features. Captain Reed, we're diverting the fleet vessel Aurora's Reach to intercept you. Estimated arrival is 18 hours ahead of schedule. Prepare the Dreadveil specimen for military containment. With respect, Admiral, I don't think we should be treating Whisper as a specimen. We've established basic communication. It's intelligent, possibly sapient. Kess's crystalline scales rippled with what might have been distress. Captain, I can barely maintain this conversation knowing that thing is on your ship. Every instinct I possess is screaming at me to terminate this call and order your vessel destroyed from a safe distance. The only reason I haven't is because your crew includes humans, and the collective charter protects your right to diplomatic contact. But make no mistake, Dreadveils are classified as existential threats. They have killed millions through direct action and fear-induced chaos. Your immunity to their effects doesn't make them safe. It makes you blind to danger. Olivia chose her words carefully. What if we've been wrong about them? What if the danger came from mutual misunderstanding rather than malicious intent? Then 7 civilizations died because of a misunderstanding. That doesn't make them less dead, Captain. Kess paused, and Olivia saw the Admiral's internal struggle play out across non-human features. You have until we arrive to document your findings. If you can prove genuine sapience and peaceful intent, the Council will consider alternative containment measures. But Captain Reed, understand what you're asking. You want us to overcome 2,000 years of instinct and trauma. You want us to look at our nightmares made flesh and see neighbors. That's not a small thing. The transmission ended. Olivia turned back to Whisper, who had been watching the exchange with clear attention. She wondered how much the Dreadveil understood, whether it could sense the tension in her voice if not the specific words. Those 6 eyes met hers, and she felt that gentle pressure against her thoughts again, not invasive but present, curious, maybe even concerned. An alarm sounded from deeper in the cargo hold. Ashok checked his monitors and went pale. Another container is failing. The containment field is destabilizing. Danny pulled up the cargo manifest. There are 5 more Dreadveils in suspended animation. If that container opens, we'll handle it. Olivia surprised herself with the certainty in her voice. She looked at Whisper, who had risen to its feet, attention fixed on the failing container. If we're the only species that can do this, then we have a responsibility to try. Not just for them, but for every species in the galaxy that might be misunderstood next. The container breach alarm intensified. Through the transparent panels, Olivia could see movement inside the failing unit. Another Dreadveil was waking up, and this time, they wouldn't have the luxury of a slow, careful first contact. This time, they would find out if trust could be built fast enough to prevent catastrophe, and if one Dreadveil could help bridge the gap to another. The container split open with a sound like tearing metal, and the second Dreadveil hit the cargo bay floor already moving. This one was larger than Whisper, with gray patterns streaking through its dark fur like storm clouds. Old scars marked its shoulders and flanks, and when it opened its 6 eyes, Olivia saw something in them that hadn't been in Whisper's gaze. Wariness earned through hard experience. Storm, as Danny immediately named it, swung its massive head toward the humans and made a sound like grinding rock. The tendril mane spread wide in what could only be a threat display. Whisper moved between them instantly, positioning itself as a barrier. The two Dreadveils faced each other, and even the humans felt something building in the air. Pressure like before a thunderstorm, tension that made hair stand on end and teeth ache. Olivia raised one hand slowly, palm out. She kept her voice steady. "We're not a threat. You're safe here." Storm's attention snapped to her, those 6 eyes blazing with intensity. Olivia felt the psychic pressure increase, probing harder than Whisper's gentle touches had been. For the first time, she experienced a flash of what other species must feel constantly in a Dreadveil's presence. Primal fear that bypassed rational thought and went straight to the oldest parts of her brain. The moment passed, but it left her shaken. Storm was testing her, pushing to see if she would break. She didn't step back. She didn't raise her voice or make sudden movements. She just stood there, breathing steadily, letting Storm see that she recognized the danger but chose to stay anyway. Behind her, Danny and Ashok remained still as statues, understanding without words that any sudden motion could shatter whatever fragile moment was building. Whisper made a series of vocalizations, sounds that ranged from low rumbles to high crystalline notes. Storm responded, and Olivia realized with sudden clarity that she was hearing language. Not human language, not anything resembling the speech patterns she knew, but communication nonetheless. The two Dreadveils were talking to each other. Storm's aggressive posture gradually relaxed. The tendril mane lowered, though it didn't fold completely. The creature moved sideways, giving itself a better view of the entire cargo bay while keeping both Whisper and the humans in its line of sight. Defensive rather than aggressive. Scared rather than hostile. Olivia gestured to Ashok, who understood and slowly pulled up the symbol interface they'd developed with Whisper. He positioned the screen where Storm could see it, then backed away. Whisper approached the screen, selected several symbols, then looked at Storm expectantly. The larger Dreadveil watched, head tilting in consideration. Minutes passed. Storm moved closer to the interface, each step deliberate and cautious. It studied the symbols, then looked at Whisper. More vocalizations passed between them. Finally, Storm reached out with one tendril and touched the screen. The selection was uncertain, but clear. Question. Danny let out a breath he'd been holding. It wants to know what's happening. Ashok worked the interface carefully, selecting symbols to build a message. Safe place. No harm. Understanding. Storm read the message, and something in its posture shifted. The wariness remained, but aggression faded into uncertainty. It looked at the humans, at Whisper, at the damaged container it had emerged from, as if trying to piece together a puzzle with missing pieces. Olivia noticed the scars on Storm's head more clearly now. Some were old injuries, but others looked too precise, too regular. Surgical scars. Research scars. Ashok saw them too and pulled up enhanced imaging on his scanner. What the screen showed made Olivia's stomach turn. Cybernetic implants embedded in Storm's skull, partially removed but leaving permanent damage. Someone had experimented on this creature, treated it as a specimen rather than a person. She selected symbols on the interface. Pain. Past. Sorry. Storm looked at the message for a long moment, then at her. The psychic pressure shifted, less threatening and more searching. Olivia felt the Dreadveil trying to understand why this human would apologize for something she hadn't done. Why these beings were trying to communicate rather than contain or hurt. Hunger eventually overcame caution. Whisper had learned that humans provided food, and it demonstrated this by approaching the supply locker where they'd stored ration bars. Storm watched this interaction with clear interest. When Danny offered food to Storm directly, placing it on the floor and backing away, the larger Dreadveil investigated cautiously. It ate slowly, never taking its eyes off the humans, ready to bolt or fight at the first sign of danger. Hours passed. The Aurora's reach was getting closer, and Admiral Kess had made clear that time was running short. Olivia worked with both Dreadveils, building trust through patience and consistency. Ashok expanded the symbol vocabulary, creating more complex concepts. Storm learned faster than Whisper had, possibly because it could watch Whisper's interactions and understand by example. The question Olivia had been building toward finally appeared on the screen. "Are you prisoners?" Both Dreadveils responded without hesitation. "Yes, do you want to harm us?" "Now, why were your kind hunting other species?" Storm and Whisper exchanged vocalizations, something being discussed between them. Then Storm approached the interface and painstakingly spelled out an answer that made everything suddenly, terribly clear. Hungry, scared, alone. Olivia sat down hard on a nearby cargo container. Not monsters, not existential threats by choice, just beings trying to survive in a galaxy that looked at them and saw only nightmares. The Dreadveils had hunted because they were starving. They'd fought because they were attacked first. They'd become the thing everyone feared because fear was the only response anyone ever gave them. Danny's voice was quiet. "We did this to them. The collective, I mean. We made them into monsters by treating them like monsters." A transmission alert cut through the cargo bay. Admiral Kess appeared on screen. And this time the Vryn commander was in full military gear, prepared for combat. "Captain Reed, I've been reviewing your communication logs and sensor data. I've also been reading historical files I hoped I'd never have to look at again. I'm prepared to delay the containment order by 48 hours, but there's a condition." "What condition?" "The other 3 containers in your hold are also failing. Structural integrity will collapse within the next 2 days. If you believe the Dreadveils can be reasoned with, you need to prove it when 3 more wake up simultaneously. If you can establish peaceful contact with 5 Dreadveils at once, the Council will reconsider the classification. But Captain, if this goes wrong, if even one of them becomes aggressive, I have orders to contain the situation by any means necessary. That includes destroying your ship with everyone aboard." Olivia looked at Whisper and Storm, both now resting near each other with the easy familiarity of pack members. 3 more Dreadveils about to wake up. 3 more minds full of fear and trauma and justified suspicion. 3 more chances to either build bridges or confirm everyone's worst fears. "We'll do it," she said. "But we do it our way. No weapons, no containment gear, no show of force. Just humans trying to talk to beings who've never been given a chance to be anything except afraid." Kess studied her through the screen, and Olivia saw calculation behind those alien eyes. Finally, the Admiral nodded. 48 hours, Captain. Make them count. The fate of your species' relationship with the collective may depend on what happens in your cargo bay. Prove that your immunity to fear is an asset rather than a liability. Prove that understanding can exist where instinct says only survival matters. The transmission ended. Olivia approached the symbol interface and created a new message for Whisper and Storm. "More of your kind coming. Will you help us help them?" Both Dreadveils looked at each other, then at her. Whisper selected symbols first, yes, packed together. Storm followed with its own message. Trust. Try. Hope. And Olivia understood that what happened next would determine not just whether humanity could coexist with Dreadveils, but whether an entire species could be given back the chance to be something other than the galaxy's nightmare. Preparation took precedence over sleep. Olivia and her crew transformed the cargo bay into something more suitable for confused, frightened beings than cold metal storage. They rigged softer lighting in zones, created separated spaces where Dreadveils could retreat if overwhelmed, and set up multiple communication interfaces at different heights. Danny fabricated simple objects that could be manipulated and explored. Environmental enrichment borrowed from animal rescue protocols he'd studied years ago. Ashok prepared medical supplies just in case. Whisper and Storm watched these preparations with clear interest, occasionally rearranging items the humans placed, improving the layout in ways that suggested they understood spatial planning better than any creature that operated purely on instinct could. Storm spent considerable time examining the medical supplies, touching each item carefully before moving to the next. Olivia realized the Dreadveil was remembering past experiences with such equipment, probably none of them pleasant. The first container opened exactly when the structural monitors predicted. The dread veil that emerged moved slowly, stiffly like joints that hadn't bent properly in too long. It was older than Whisper or Storm, with fur that had faded to gray in patches and eyes that were clouded but still aware. Danny's nickname came, immediately Patch for the distinctive lighter patch on its shoulder. Whisper approached first, vocalizations soft and welcoming. Patch responded with sounds that trembled with age but carried clear emotion. The two dread veils touched tendril to tendril, and Olivia witnessed what could only be described as relief. Patch had expected isolation or threat and found Pack instead. Storm joined them, and the three dread veils engaged in a ritual of greeting that involved synchronized movements, vocal harmonies, and that building pressure of psychic energy that no longer felt quite as threatening to the humans. This was communication on levels humans couldn't fully perceive, but the emotional content was clear enough. Reunion, recognition, pack bonds reforming after forced separation. The second container breached minutes later. This dread veil was smaller, younger, and exploded into the cargo bay with kinetic energy that spoke of long confinement and pent-up frustration. It spun in circles, examining everything, tendril mane flashing through the air in patterns too fast to follow. Quick, Danny named it, and the label fit perfectly. Quick spotted the enrichment objects immediately and pounced on them with obvious joy, batting a floating tether ball with alternating tendrils, creating a game from simple materials. The sheer playfulness of it caught everyone off guard. This wasn't a nightmare predator. This was something young, discovering that the world could be interesting rather than hostile. The final container opened with less warning than the others. One moment it was stable, the next it was splitting apart, and the dread veil that emerged commanded immediate attention from every being in the cargo bay. Larger than Storm, moving with absolute confidence, this one assessed the situation with rapid efficiency. Its vocalizations were complex, layered with harmonics that made the others respond instantly. Singer, Olivia thought, watching how this dread veil orchestrated the others with sound and gesture. Singer looked at Whisper, then Storm, then Patch, and finally Quick. Vocalizations passed between them, faster than the humans could track. Then Singer turned its full attention to Olivia and her crew. The psychic pressure was different from what Storm had projected, not aggressive, but absolutely focused. Singer was taking their measure, evaluating these strange beings that stood beside its packmates without apparent fear. Olivia approached the nearest communication interface and selected symbols. Welcome. Safe. Pack. Singer watched her hands move, watched the symbols appear, watched the other dread veils respond with their own interface touches. The intelligence behind those 6 eyes was impossible to miss. This was a leader, someone who had made decisions and carried responsibility. Singer moved to the interface, and its interaction was immediately more sophisticated than the others had been. It didn't just select symbols, but combined them in complex chains, asking questions about the ship, about the humans, about where they were and what would happen next. Ashok worked frantically to expand the vocabulary fast enough to keep up. The conversation that developed over the next hours was halting but profound. Singer explained, through painstaking symbol selection and with Whisper's help translating, intent that dreadveils had once been a spacefaring species. They'd used their psychic abilities to navigate through space, sensing gravitational fields that instruments could barely detect. They'd hunted non-sentient prey on various worlds, living in harmony with the ecosystem. First contact with the collective had been catastrophic, not because dreadveils were inherently aggressive, but because the fear response triggered conflict neither side intended. Olivia asked the question that had been haunting her. What about the extinct civilizations? Singer's response, built from careful symbol selection, painted a darker picture. The extinctions were mutual destruction events. Dreadveils attacked because they were attacked first. Populations panicked in their presence, made irrational decisions, turned on each other in fear-driven chaos. By the time anyone realized communication might be possible, too many had died on both sides for peace to seem achievable. Admiral Kess had been monitoring everything through remote feeds. The Vryn commander's voice came through the communication system, strained but controlled. Captain Reed, I'm watching 5 apex predators interact with your crew in what appears to be cooperative dialogue. This contradicts everything in our historical records. I need to know. Can they control their fear effect? Singer heard the question through the audio pickup and approached the interface. The Dreadveil selected symbols. Try. Not easy. For others. We need proof, Kess said. I need to see a Dreadveil suppress its psychic field in the presence of a non-human species. If they can do that, if they can choose not to trigger the fear response, the Council will reconsider their classification. Olivia looked at Singer. It's dangerous. If the Admiral experiences the full effect, it could kill them. Singer selected symbols slowly. Understand. Risk. Necessary. Then added, trust human. Trust pack. Try. The test was scheduled for the following day, giving Singer time to rest and prepare. The 5 Dreadveils settled together in one section of the cargo bay, arranged in a pattern that reminded Olivia of wolf packs she'd seen in nature documentaries. Patch rested in the center, given place of honor. Singer and Storm flanked the elder, protective and attentive. Whisper settled near them, with Quick pressed against Whisper's side, in the position of youth seeking comfort. Danny sat down next to Olivia, watching the Dreadveils rest. They're just people. Different kind of people, but still people. How did the galaxy get this so wrong? Because fear doesn't ask questions, Ashok answered. Fear just reacts. And when everyone around you is afraid, it's easier to believe in monsters than to imagine you might be wrong. Olivia thought about the test scheduled for the next day. Admiral Kess would transport aboard, heavily medicated but still vulnerable. If Singer couldn't suppress the fear effect, the Admiral might die. If Singer succeeded but then lost control, the same result. And if the test failed, orders would come to destroy everyone in the cargo bay, human and Dreadveil alike, to prevent what the collective would see as an unacceptable threat. Singer raised its head, looked directly at Olivia across the cargo bay, and made a sound like wind chimes in a storm. Whisper lifted its head too, and Storm and even old Patch. Quick bounced to its feet, energy still overflowing despite everything. And Olivia understood what they were saying without words or symbols or interfaces. They were choosing to trust. Choosing to risk everything on the possibility that understanding could overcome instinct. Choosing to believe that these strange humans who didn't fear them might actually be the bridge to a galaxy that could, eventually, see them as something other than nightmares. She just hoped that choice wouldn't get them all killed. The observation deck above the cargo bay had been designed for monitoring hazardous materials, not witnessing potential diplomatic breakthroughs or catastrophic failures. Admiral Kess stood behind transparent aluminum panels strong enough to contain explosive decompression, medicated heavily enough that walking required concentration, and terrified in ways that no amount of military training could fully suppress. The Vryn commander had faced combat, had made decisions that cost lives, had navigated political complexities that would have broken lesser beings. None of it compared to deliberately standing within range of 5 Dreadveils. Olivia watched from below, standing among the 5 creatures that had become something more than specimens over the past days. Singer stood at the front, absolutely still, every tendril laid flat against its body in concentration. Behind Singer, the other 4 Dreadveils arranged themselves in a formation that seemed both protective and supportive. Storm and Whisper flanked Singer like honor guards. Patch rested slightly back, conserving energy but present. Quick vibrated with barely contained motion but held position. The psychic pressure in the cargo bay had been building since before dawn, a sensation like atmospheric changes before a storm. The Dreadveils were preparing, pulling their abilities inward rather than projecting outward, focusing on control that didn't come naturally to psychic predators evolved to radiate fear. Kess activated the communication channel. Even through the audio system, the Admiral's voice shook. I'm ready. But Captain Reed, if I signal distress, if my vitals spike beyond safe parameters, you need to step away from them immediately. My security team has orders to contain the situation. Understood. Olivia looked at Singer and gave the signal they'd agreed upon, a simple gesture that meant begin. Singer closed all 6 eyes. The other dreadveils followed suit. The pressure in the cargo bay shifted, pulling inward instead of expanding outward. Olivia felt the change like pressure equalizing in her ears, a release of tension she hadn't fully realized she was carrying. Above, through the transparent panels, Admiral Kess stood rigid as stone. Seconds passed, then minutes. Kess remained upright, breathing visible but controlled. The Admiral's scaled hands pressed against the panels trembled but didn't spasm. The Vryn commander was experiencing something unprecedented in collective history, standing in the presence of 5 dreadveils without complete psychological collapse. 90 seconds. That's how long Singer maintained the suppression before the strain became too much. The dreadveil's eyes opened, and the psychic field snapped back to its normal state like a released bowstring. Kess staggered, catching the wall for support. Medical alarms went off, and the security team rushed in, pulling the Admiral away from the observation window, but 90 seconds was enough. Olivia received Kess's transmission an hour later, after the Admiral had recovered enough to function. The Vryn commander appeared on screen, still pale beneath crystalline scales but steady. "Captain Reed, what I experienced was the single most difficult thing I've ever done, but I did it. I looked at a dreadveil and didn't die. The Council is convening an emergency session. Your findings, combined with this demonstration, have forced a reconsideration of 2,000 years of policy." The transmission that followed came from the Collective Council chambers, broadcast across multiple systems. Ambassador Terrence Liu, representing Earth and human interests, stood before representatives of 17 species and made the speech that would define humanity's role in galactic affairs for generations. Olivia watched with her crew and the dreadveils gathered around the largest monitor. Liu's words were clear and direct. Humanity didn't view immunity to dreadveil fear as a privilege or a convenience. It was a responsibility. Earth's history was filled with examples of apex predators driven to extinction through fear and misunderstanding. Wolves, great cats, sharks, bears, countless species hunted to the edge of oblivion because humans saw monsters instead of animals trying to survive. "We almost made those mistakes," Liu said. "We came close to destroying species that we now understand are vital to healthy ecosystems. We learned, slowly and painfully, that the things we fear often deserve our understanding instead." The collective stands at a similar crossroads. The dreadveils have been classified as existential threats for 2 millennia. But what if we've been wrong? What if the real threat was our inability to see past our fear? The debate that followed lasted hours. Representatives argued for continued containment, for extermination, for study, for rehabilitation. The Ranthian delegate spoke of ancient traumas. The Kairos representative described hive-wide panic that had lasted generations. The Vryn Council member recounted the massacre of Station Karthus, where 40,000 died in fear-driven chaos after a single dreadveil escaped containment. But others spoke too. Scientists presented Olivia's documentation of dreadveil intelligence and communication. Xenopsychologists discussed the possibility that fear-driven first contact had created a self-fulfilling prophecy. Historians noted that in every recorded dreadveil encounter, the creatures had been attacked first or trapped in situations that would make any sentient being desperate. The vote, when it came, was close but decisive. The collective granted dreadveils provisional sentient status with conditions. They would be removed from maximum security containment and relocated to a neutral territory. They would be given opportunity to demonstrate peaceful coexistence. And humanity, as the only species capable of working with them without psychological barriers, would be responsible for their welfare and integration. Olivia felt the weight of that responsibility settle across her shoulders. She looked at Singer, who had been watching the proceedings with clear attention despite not understanding the specific words. The dreadveil approached the communication interface and selected symbols. What happens now? She thought about how to answer, then selected her own symbols carefully. New home, safe place, freedom, learn together. Singer studied the message, then turned to the other dreadveils. Vocalizations passed between them, complex discussions in a language humans were only beginning to understand. Finally, Singer returned to the interface and spelled out a response that made Olivia's throat tight. Thank you. Hope, new path. Packed together. Over the following weeks, the distant shore diverted to human-controlled space. The collective had designated a small moon, barely habitable but rich in resources as a sanctuary. They called it Haven, and Olivia watched it grow from concept to reality. Scientists arrived not to experiment but to learn. Engineers built structures designed with Dreadvale input through the communication interfaces. Xenolinguists worked to understand the complex vocalizations that formed the basis of Dreadvale language. More Dreadvales were located in research facilities across the galaxy. 37 in total, scattered across a dozen worlds kept in isolation or suspended animation, studied as specimens rather than persons. All were being transported to Haven under human supervision. Olivia resigned her position as freighter captain to become director of the Haven project, and Danny and Ashok followed without hesitation. The first group of rescued Dreadvales arrived within a month. Olivia stood at Haven's primary landing zone, watching the transport ships descend. Whisper stood beside her with Storm on her other side. The 5 original Dreadvales had become ambassadors to their own kind, helping new arrivals understand that Haven was genuinely safe, that humans were genuinely trying to help. Some arrivals were easy. Younger Dreadvales adapted quickly, grateful for open spaces and pack connections. Others were harder. Dreadvales kept in isolation for decades struggled to socialize, their instincts worn down by too many years alone. Some retained trauma from experiments and medical procedures, flinching from instruments even when wielded gently. But progress happened, slowly, carefully, built on patience and consistency and the simple revolutionary act of treating beings with dignity regardless of how terrifying they appeared to. 6 months after that first container breach on the distant shore, Olivia stood in Haven's observation center and watched 37 Dreadvales move through spaces designed for their needs. She saw Singer working with human linguists, painstakingly building bridges between species through shared vocabulary. She saw Storm and Quick leading navigation exercises, demonstrating their gravitational sense to scientists who could barely believe the precision. She saw Patch surrounded by younger Dreadvales, clearly teaching something, passing on knowledge that had nearly been lost. And she saw Whisper, the first Dreadvale she'd met, arranging objects in careful patterns for a group of newly arrived youngsters, showing them that the world could be interesting and safe and full of possibility rather than fear. The galaxy was learning that monsters were often just the misunderstood, that fear could be overcome with effort and will, and that the scariest thing sometimes was not the creature in front of you, but your own inability to see past instinct to the person beyond. 20 years changed everything and nothing. Haven had grown from a desperate experiment into a thriving community, home to over 300 Dreadvales and the humans who worked alongside them. The small moon that had once been barely habitable now supported ecosystems, carefully designed to meet the needs of beings who hunted by psychic sense and communicated in harmonics humans could only partially hear. Olivia walked paths she'd walked countless times before, but the view never stopped being remarkable. Young Dreadvales born free rather than in captivity, played in open spaces their ancestors had been denied. Human children, raised alongside beings the galaxy had feared for millennia, saw Dreadvales as neighbors and teachers rather than nightmares. The integration had happened slowly, carefully, but it had happened. The crisis alert that interrupted the quiet morning was the kind Olivia had been halfway expecting for years. A Dreadvale ship had been detected in deep space, well outside collective territory. These weren't rescued specimens but refugees, Dreadvales who had never been captured, who had been hiding for generations, surviving by avoiding all contact with other sentient species. Their ship was failing, life support critical, and they were sending distress signals into the void with no expectation of rescue. The Collective Council authorized immediate response, but the refugees refused human ships, refused collective vessels, refused all attempts at communication. They had spent generations hiding from the species that hunted them, and trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt through emergency transmissions. Singer, now elderly and moving with the same careful stiffness that Patch had shown years ago, volunteered immediately. Storm and Quick joined without hesitation. The 3 veterans of the original distant shore encounter would go to meet the refugees, and humans would follow at a careful distance, ready to help, but giving the Dreadvale space to make first contact with their own kind. Olivia insisted on being part of the human contingent despite her age. Danny and Ashok, Both now senior administrators at Haven came as well. Some bonds formed in cargo bays under emergency lighting didn't weaken with time. The refugee ship was a heartbreaking thing, cobbled together from scavenged parts and held together through desperation and skill. 17 Dreadvales lived in spaces barely large enough for half that number. They had been running for so long that running was all they knew. Singer approached the airlock alone, transmitting in the complex harmonics of Dreadvale language. The conversation that followed took hours. Voices carrying through vacuum via radio. Transmission since sound couldn't. Olivia watched readouts and tried to interpret emotional content from Singer's vocal patterns, wariness, suspicion, pain, and slowly, carefully hope, the refugees agreed to let Singer board their ship. Then storm, then quick. The 3 Haven Dreadvales disappeared into the refugee vessel and Olivia forced herself to wait rather than intervene. This wasn't her moment. This was Dreadvales reclaiming their own story, making their own choices about whether safety was worth the risk. Hours later, Singer emerged and transmitted to the human ship. They come, scared. Bring young one. Need careful. The revelation that there was a child among the refugees changed everything. In 20 years of the Haven Project, only 3 Dreadvale children had been born. The species had been so traumatized by captivity and loss that reproduction had nearly stopped. A child among the refugees meant this group had held on to hope even while running, had believed enough in the future to bring new life into a hostile galaxy. The refugee Dreadvales transferred to the human medical ship with extreme caution. They were gaunt from insufficient food, marked by old injuries that had healed badly without proper care, exhausted from years of constant vigilance. The child, small enough to fit in Olivia's arms if she dared try, stayed pressed against its parent's side, 6 eyes wide with confusion and fear. Olivia kept her distance, letting Singer and the other Haven Dreadvales manage the integration. But she watched as the youngster, curiosity eventually overwhelming caution, crept forward to investigate a floating tether ball that Quick had brought along. She watched as the child batted at it experimentally, then with growing excitement, creating a game from a simple object the same way Quick had done 2 decades earlier. And she watched as Patch, ancient now but still present, approached the child and made the gentle sounds of welcome and teaching. The old Dreadvale had survived captivity, isolation, and the near extinction of their entire species. Now Patch had the chance to pass on knowledge to a new generation, born into freedom rather than fear. The journey to Haven took 3 days. The refugee Dreadvales spent most of it sleeping, proper rest for the first time in years, surrounded by pack and safety they hadn't believed still existed. The child explored the ship with increasing confidence, learning from the Haven Dreadvales that the world could be interesting rather than only dangerous. Haven's landing zone was full when they arrived. Word had spread through the community, and Dreadvales of all ages had gathered to welcome the refugees home. Human children stood beside Dreadvale youngsters, having grown up with friendships that would have been impossible a generation before. Scientists and handlers and engineers who had dedicated their lives to the Haven Project waited to see the fruits of their labor. The refugee Dreadvales emerged from the ship slowly, overwhelmed by the sight of so many of their kind living openly, without hiding. The parent of the young one made a sound that didn't need translation, harmonics of grief and relief mixing into something too complex for simple words. This was a return to something they'd thought lost forever: pack, home, future. That evening, as Haven's sun set in colors that Earth's sun never produced, the Dreadvales gathered in the central commons area. It had become tradition over the years, this evening gathering where stories were told and bonds reinforced. The refugees joined hesitantly, still adjusting to the idea that safety could be real rather than temporary. Olivia sat at the edge of the gathering, as she had so many times before. Whisper, moving stiffly with age but still present, still engaged, approached and settled beside her. The Dreadvale's massive form lowered to the ground and its head came to rest near Olivia's shoulder. Other Dreadvales arranged themselves around the commons, some in family groups, some with human partners they'd worked with for years, all part of a community that shouldn't have been possible. Singer led the evening harmonics and the other Dreadvales joined in. The sound was something humans could only partially perceive. Harmonics that resonated on frequencies beyond their hearing, but still felt in the chest and bones. The psychic pressure that had once meant only fear now carried different meaning: belonging, memory, hope. The refugee parent positioned itself where it could watch its child, who had already found playmates among the Haven youngsters. The little one tumbled and chased and learned what it meant to simply be young without fear. And Olivia saw in that parent's posture something she'd seen in herself 20 years ago. The choice to trust, to believe that understanding might actually be possible, that the future could be different from the past. Young Dreadvales and human children settled near their elders, learning by proximity and example. The refugee child, exhausted from play, curled against its parent, then extended one tendril to touch a human child sitting nearby. The human child, no more than 7 years old, touched the tendril back without hesitation, without fear, because fear was something learned and this child had learned different lessons. Whisper made a sound like wind through canyons, the same sound Olivia had heard on the distant shore so long ago. But now she understood the meaning behind it better. Not threat, not warning, just communication from a being trying to connect across impossible differences. Olivia placed her hand on Whisper's flank, feeling the warmth beneath dark fur, the steady breathing of a creature at rest. Around them, Haven settled into evening routines. Lights dimmed to comfortable levels. Conversations, both verbal and harmonic, softened to murmurs. The community prepared for night, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow would come and it would be safe. The question posed so long ago had been answered not in a single moment but in 20 years of choices, large and small, made by beings on both sides of an impossible divide. The fear beast had awakened and found not prey but potential pack. And in choosing rest over hunting, in choosing trust over instinct, both species had discovered something the galaxy had believed impossible. Understanding didn't erase differences. It didn't make danger disappear or instincts vanish, but it created space for something new. Coexistence not despite fear but beyond it, built on recognition that all sentient beings, regardless of how frightening they appeared, deserved the chance to be seen as people rather than nightmares. Whisper's breathing slowed into the rhythm of sleep, secure beside the human who had chosen understanding over instinct 2 decades ago. Around them, other Dreadvales and humans rested together, proof that the scariest monsters were often just the misunderstood, and that courage sometimes meant nothing more complicated than choosing to see past fear to the person waiting on the other side. Haven's night felt gentle and complete, and in the darkness, peace settled over a community that shouldn't have existed but did anyway, built by beings who had looked at impossible odds and decided that understanding was worth the effort, that dignity was worth the risk, and that sometimes the greatest courage was simply choosing to care about someone the rest of the galaxy had already decided was a monster. The fear beast slept peacefully because someone had finally given it reason to believe that peace was possible. And in that sleep, in that trust, in that impossible choice made real through years of patient work, both species found redemption.